Luke chapter 20. At the end of chapter 19, we concluded with Jesus teaching in the temple. Oh, I forgot. Wearing one of my favorite shirts. God wants full-time custody, not just weekend visits. I thought it was very appropriate for this lesson. I didn't realize it while I was writing the lesson, but I just finished the lesson, and I had this shirt on, so I had to mention it. Anyway, at the end of chapter 19, Jesus was teaching in the temple on a continuous basis. Now, remember, all this is happening in the last week of Jesus' time here on earth. Chapter 19, Jesus entered Jerusalem, and if you read all four Gospels, it appears the clearing of the temple was on Monday. Some would say Sunday. I'm going to go with Monday. It seems to make more sense. So, do you think chapter 20 is on Monday? Maybe. Tuesday? I lean that way. Wednesday? Maybe. Could have even been Thursday, but that seems unlikely because Jesus and his disciples were preparing to celebrate the Passover meal, instituting what we call the Last Supper. We do not know when chapter 20 occurs, but the serious Bible student might wonder when. It seems likely it was Monday or Tuesday, based on subsequent events in Luke's Gospel. All right, so let's jump in. Verses 1 and 2, one day when Jesus was teaching the people in the temple courts, he was preaching about the good news. Meanwhile, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders approached Jesus and challenged him. What right do you have to teach and do all the things you do? Who authorized you? Well, once again, Luke repeats the Jewish religious leaders were trying to trap Jesus so they can have him arrested. I mean, basically, that's a theme in the Gospels, not just Luke's Gospel. Verses 3 and 4, Jesus responded, "Before I answer your question, answer my question. Was John's baptism authorized by God or not?" Jesus turned the tables on him here. Verses 5 and 6. After discussing his question altogether, they replied that they decided that if they said God authorized John the Baptist baptism, he would ask them why they didn't believe in John the Baptist. If they said it was not from God, they were afraid of what the people would say, because they thought the people might kill them by stoning them, because the people believed in John as one of God's prophets. That's verses 5 and 6. This seems to be explained very well, very clearly by Luke, but I love it. I want to read it again. After discussing his question altogether, they decided that if they said God authorized John the Baptist's baptism, he would ask why we didn't believe John the Baptist. They decided that if they said John's baptism wasn't authorized by God, the people would be angry with them and probably kill them by stoning them, because the people believed in John as one of God's prophets. Wow. They recognized the trap Jesus had set, just like he recognized theirs. I got just a squirrel here, a shiny thing, off the track. Who responded for Jesus' accusers? Did you ever wonder about that? All these times when somebody challenges Jesus, or Jesus asks a question and somebody has to give him a response, like in this case. Who was the mouthpiece? Do you think there were just a few? Well, if you understand Jewish culture, you would not have you would understand it would not have been the senior leaders, the elders. They would let the younger men do such things. A lot of times, wise men, older men, let others stick their foot in the mouth. Even today, a lot of even presidents of the United States will let somebody else make statements, and then they can come in and smooth things out, disagree with the statement, agree with it, whatever. But do you think it was a different man each time throughout the Gospels? Maybe they wanted to keep Jesus not knowing who would be his next challenger. I don't know. Something that just occurred to me. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, in verse 7, after their discussion, they told Jesus they did not know where John's authorization came from. Another thing. What was Jesus doing while they were discussing this? He asked them a question, and then they go off in a huddle. You think it was like a football huddle, all in a big circle? The senior men, the older men in the middle, and younger men around the outside. What was Jesus doing while they discussed this among themselves? Was he just sitting there? Was he talking things over with his disciples, explaining something? Did you ever think about that? Remember, I'm always trying to encourage you how to study the Bible, and that's to think about it, to read it with your mind engaged, not just saying, I already read this one, blah, 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 blah. And then have you ever taken time to really analyze their answer? Doesn't their response seem to indicate that they did not believe John's baptism was authorized by God? They said, we don't know where his authorization came from. I think they're saying it wasn't from God. At least, if I was one of the people, I would have thought that, but evidently the people didn't want to challenge them or whatever. In verse 8, Jesus told them, since you did not answer my question, I will not answer your question. That ended that, people. But the next paragraph seems to occur immediately after this trap. And can you imagine what the common people were thinking after the failed trap we just studied? Jesus probably had their attention, you know what I'm saying? So he took advantage to share a parable. And as we read this parable, it's often called the parable of the tenants, Tenants, the renters, if you will. As we read this parable, do you know who is represented in the parable? I mean, there are basically four figures. Some are multiple. There is the landowner. Who does that represent? There's the caretakers, the farmers, the renters. Who do they represent? And then the owners send servants. Who do they represent? And he finally sends his son. And who does he represent? Some of those I think you might already know. One or two of them, I wonder if you understand who they symbolize in this parable. Think about it as we read it. I'm just going to read the whole parable, okay? Jesus then looked back at the people. He told them a story about a man who had planted a vineyard and then rented his vineyard to some farmers and went to a distant place to live. When it was time to harvest, he sent a servant to collect his share of the produce. However, the renters beat the servant and sent him away with nothing. Then he sent another servant. This one was also beaten and treated even more harshly than the first servant. This servant was also sent away with nothing. The man then sent a third servant. This servant was wounded and sent away with nothing. The man decided to send his son, whom he loved greatly. He thought for sure that his son would be treated respectfully. However, when the renters saw the son, they gathered together and discussed what they needed to do. They decided that if they killed the one who was to inherit everything, then the land they were taking care of would be theirs. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Jesus then asked the people, "What do you think the man who owned the vineyard will do when he returns?" He will immediately return and kill those who had killed his son. Then he will give the vineyard to some other people. Hearing this story, the people said, "God forbid that this should ever happen." I'm with the people. I mean, that's horrible. In that day and age, somebody might get away with it. Maybe. But before we started this parable, I asked you who was represented in the parable. Did you understand whom it was speaking about? Let me make it clear. And you can go back and read it again. The landowner represents God. The caretakers represent the religious leaders of the Jews. The servants represent God's prophets. The Son represents Jesus, the Messiah. You understand it? God and the religious leaders, they're taking care of God's people. God sent his servants, prophets, and they were killed. And the Son represents Jesus, whom the caretakers, the religious leaders, kill, or were about to. Is that what you've been taught? It is what most preachers will teach, but in my experience, too many seem to rush through this parable. Take time to make sure you understand it. Now, in the next 3 verses, we're going to see that the Jewish religious leaders understood exactly what Jesus was saying in this parable. I'm going to read 17 and 18, and then I want to say something, and then I'm going to read 19, okay? These 3 are in response to the parable. Jesus stared at the people and asked, "Then what do our scriptures mean when they say the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? Everyone that falls on that stone will be broken into pieces and they will be crushed." Now this comes immediately after Jesus saying, finishing the story and the people saying, "God forbid that this should ever happen." Jesus stared at the people when they said that. And he asked, "Then what do our scriptures mean when they say the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? Everyone that falls on that stone will be broken into pieces and they will be crushed." The symbolism continues. That stone is clearly, again, the Son, the Messiah. If you take these 2 verses out of context, which many do, they seem out of place. I mean, there's almost no purpose to them. But if you think about them as a follow-up to the parable, then you begin to understand. The son whom the farmers killed was the stone that was rejected, and those who rejected the son would be destroyed. Let's continue and see how the religious leaders responded to this parable. Verse 19, the teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for any way they could arrest Jesus immediately, because they knew the story he had told was accusing them. But they were hesitant because they were afraid of the people. Now they knew Jesus was saying that they were the ones who killed the landowner's son, and because of that they wanted to arrest Jesus. Nothing new there. Luke has written that more than once, but this time he wrote that they wanted to arrest him immediately. So let's continue. And so Luke's going to continue next with how the religious leaders continued with another attempt to trap Jesus. Luke writes this, verses 20 through 22. They watched Jesus carefully, and they sent spies who pretended to be interested in what Jesus was saying. They were hoping to catch Jesus saying something they could arrest him for. Then they could turn him over to the governor. The spies asked Jesus, "Teacher, we know what you teach is right. We know no one expects you to say what they want you to say because you teach the way of God truthfully. So please tell us, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar?" Now, no doubt most of you have heard this lesson, but I want to ask some questions. Did you realize the religious leaders sent spies into the crowd around Jesus? How do you think they tried to fit in? I mean, they were Jews. They didn't have to dress different or talk different. Did they try to get close to the inner 12? Or did they just try to get close to the other disciples? Or maybe did they just talk to his other followers? Do you think they just asked questions? Or did they try to persuade people Jesus is nuts? What do you think these spies were doing? Have you ever thought about that? Did you know that the Pharisees sent spies among Jesus' crowd? Well, that's who asked that question. And Jesus, in 23 through 25, Jesus knew they were trying to deceive him. He said, "Show me a Roman coin. Whose image and title is stamped on it?" They said, "Caesar's." He told them, "Then give back to Caesar what belongs to him. Give to God what belongs to God." What lesson does this have for us? I mean, I'm sure you've been told something. Some would say Jesus is saying all money should be given to the government because that's whose inscription's there. No, clearly that's not what he was saying. But he does seem to be saying that we should pay the taxes we owe. Don't you agree? Does that mean we can lie on our tax returns? I mean, many people say, including Christians, the government doesn't need so much so that if we can cheat a little bit, that's okay. Do you think Jesus would agree with that philosophy? Do you think, well, do you do that? I'm just saying, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Give to God what belongs to God. And as I've told somebody just this week, he asked, why do preachers always want money? Well, first off, and we're going to get to that here in this lesson, but first off, preachers want money depending on their philosophy. Some want money so they can buy a new jet, a fancier house, bigger car, more salary, more servants, bigger church building. Some want you to give money to the church for the right reason, and that isn't it. The right reason is because throughout the Bible, God does say we are to give our tithes, our offerings, and so forth. And they are to demonstrate that we are not focused on our money. Earlier in Luke, Luke wrote, Jesus said, you can't serve God and money both. You got to pick. If money means so much to you that you aren't going to share it with God, with God's ministry, if you aren't going to support the teachers that teach you God's word, then I think you got the wrong focus in life. Give not because you have to, As Paul wrote, God loves a cheerful giver. No, it isn't about giving money because that's the rules. I couldn't care less. No matter how much you give or don't give, God will provide what God wants done. God will provide for that. Give to God what belongs to God. Give to the government what belongs to them. I think he'd say, don't cheat either one. What do you say? So verse 26, no matter how hard they tried, they could not trap him. Amazed at his answers, they gave up. And we shouldn't just say, I've heard all this before, and move on. We should understand just how unique Jesus' teachings and behaviors and actions were. He was unique and did not fit in with the religious leaders of the Jews. They served for themselves, not for God or his people. They sought to become wealthy, and indeed, they were quite wealthy. The Pharisees were wealthy indeed. And the Sadducees were even much richer than the Pharisees in general. How many modern pastors or ministers seem to be serving themselves so that they can be wealthy? Think about it. I'll come back to that. Okay, next we have a resurrection issue. The same story, by the way, is told right here, and we're in Luke 20, but Matthew 22, verse 23 to 33, and Mark 12, 18 to 27 tell us the exact same story. Almost, not quite word for word, but real close. Usually it was the Pharisees and teachers of the law, aka scribes in some translations, who tried to trap Jesus. Now we're going to see the Sadducees give it a shot. And remember, Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. They believed the end of this life was the end, period. Okay, so 27 through 36. Then some Sadducees came to Jesus with a question. They did not believe in the resurrection, so they challenged Jesus. Teacher, Moses' law says that if a man's brother dies, leaving a widow but no children, the brother of that man who died must marry the widow and have a son for his brother, so the son can carry on his brother's name. So there were 7 brothers. The first one married and died without having a son. The second brother married the widow, and then the third brother, followed by all the rest. All 7 brothers died without a son. Eventually, the widow died as well. When the resurrection comes, whose wife will she be, since she married all 7 of the brothers? Jesus responded, people on earth marry, but after the resurrection, those who are worthy of being part of God's kingdom will not marry, and they will never die like angels. They are God's children. What do you think about this passage? Did Jesus answer their challenge? He'll continue in a few verses. The Old Testament gives us at least one example, and plus it states the law that if a man dies without a son, his brother should marry his widow, and the first son belongs to his brother, and the rest are his. And I forgot to look up the passage, but I can find it if you're interested. Just leave me a comment. But these verses have been used to ask me questions like, will my wife and I still be a couple in heaven? Or a question about my children, and my response is always the same. Heaven is a spiritual environment. Clearly things will be different. How different? How things will be is beyond my ability to understand. The Bible does not give us a detailed explanation. But one verse I can use in response is from 1 Corinthians 13:12. Paul writes, and I'm going to quote the NIV here, for now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. I think he was writing about people and God and Jesus and so forth, but that's the best answer I can give regarding these types of questions. And so as we continue, just a reminder, the Pharisees did not believe in the resurrection, and the following verses contain Jesus' continuing response to the Sadducees' philosophical question. He answers verses 34 to 36, and then I'll read on. People on earth marry, but after the resurrection, those who are worthy of being part of God's kingdom will not marry, and they will never die like angels. They are God's children. When Moses encountered the burning bush, he showed us the dead will rise because he called the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. To him we are all alive. What did the Sadducees say in response to that? Luke doesn't give us a clue. Neither do Matthew or Mark. No response from the Sadducees, not in the Bible. To me, that says a lot. I think they kept their mouth shut and walked away. However, in verses 39 to 40, the Pharisees are kind of gloating over Jesus putting the Sadducees down. Jesus put the Pharisees down enough. Now he attacked their enemies. Verse 39 and 40, some of the teachers of the law said to Jesus, "What a great answer, teacher." After that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. The Pharisees vastly outnumbered the Sadducees, by the way. But the Sadducees were richer, as I mentioned earlier, so they held more political clout, a better relationship with Rome. So it was, political battles. So I don't think the Pharisees celebrated the Sadducees' put down too long. Verses 41 to 44. Jesus then asked them, the Pharisees, a question. Well, it actually teaches the law. That would be scribes. Jesus then asked them a question. Why do scriptures say the Messiah is the son of David? David himself wrote in the book of Psalms, God said to my Lord, sit on my right until I make your enemies bow before you. David calls him Lord. How can the Messiah be his son? All right. If you go back and read Psalm 110, this is, quote from David, is the first verse of that psalm. And, what was David wrote in that? What was he saying in that psalm? If you read Psalm 110, it's not very long. He says that the Messiah was his descendant and that the Messiah was his Lord. And there's a lot there about conquering and so forth. God said to my Lord, this is what David wrote. God said to my Lord, sit on my right until I make your enemies bow before you. With everyone listening, verses 45 to 47, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in expensive robes, and they love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace. And they love to have the most important seats in the synagogues, and they love the seats of honor at banquets. But they cheat widows out of their houses and then make lengthy, showy prayers. They will be punished more than anyone. So, does this fit in with what David wrote? Jesus is asking him, why did David call the Messiah his son? We don't know what answer they gave. Were they silent? Well, Jesus continued speaking, and he really put them down. Can you imagine this scene? This is the last paragraph of Luke 20. But Jesus spoke to his disciples, verse 45 begins with everyone listening, Jesus said to his disciples. It reminds me of, and this is not in my notes, but if you're old enough, the E.F. Hutton commercials. What do you think? Well, my broker is E.F. Hutton, and everyone goes silent. They want to hear what E.F. Hutton said. With everyone listening, Jesus said to his disciples, and everyone went silent. Do you think maybe Jesus raised his voice a little bit louder so that everyone could hear? Can you imagine this scene? With everyone listening, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in expensive robes. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace. They love to have the most important seats in the synagogues, and they love the seats of honor at banquets. But they cheat the widows out of their houses, and then they make lengthy, showy prayers. They would be punished more than anyone. He was definitely saying the religious leaders wanted to be honored, and they made sure to put on a good show. Is it just me, or do we still see a lot of that from our modern religious leaders? Do not get me wrong here. There are many pastors who are not like that. They're the ones most of us seldom notice. They're probably not very wealthy. Probably don't drive a new car, much less a fancy one. I doubt they have a jet plane. Probably not on TV, boasting about all their money, their wealth, their expensive home, their fleet of limousines, the number of servants they have in their church, most of whom are serving them, not God. The ones we don't notice, they don't have a big, expensive church. Perhaps we should be more careful about which leaders we follow. Now, I got a lot of preachers going to say they don't like this lesson. Wait a minute. Did I get it wrong? Or isn't that what Jesus was teaching? Think about it. God bless you.